Take
Please
me on
listen
your
to me.
horse, and I'll give you
If you
something no
ride east
woman can
today,
give you.
you will not
Apache
survive
woman
the
begged.
ambush they have
The
planned.
sun hung low over the desert, painting the land in shades of red and gold. The air was dry and hot, and the wind carried small clouds of dust that stung the rider's face. He urged his horse forward, listening to the soft thud of hooves on hard, cracked earth. The rider was a lone man, experienced in the ways of the frontier. He had traveled these lands before, but he never became comfortable with the silence that stretched endlessly in every direction. The desert was beautiful, yes, but it was also merciless. One wrong step, one wrong decision, and the land would take everything from a traveler: water, energy, and sometimes life itself. The man, whose name was Samuel, had been riding since sunrise, his body tense and his mind alert. He had learned long ago that the desert demanded respect. Each rock, each shadow, each rustle of leaves could be a warning, a sign of danger, or of opportunity. Samuel had traveled through Apache lands before, and he knew the stories. He had heard warnings from settlers, trappers, and scouts. The Apache were not enemies of all, but they were protective of their territory. Any stranger who crossed without care could face consequences far worse than a scolding. He also knew that sometimes survival depended on trust, not conflict. As he rode, Samuel's eyes scanned the horizon. He had been following a narrow trail that wound through the canyons, hoping to reach a small trading post before nightfall. But the desert had a way of stretching time and distance. The sun seemed to hang stubbornly in the sky, and the shadows grew long as if the earth itself was moving slower than he wanted. Then he noticed something unusual: a figure, small and moving awkwardly, struggling along a ridge not far from his path. Samuel slowed his horse, narrowing his eyes. The figure appeared to be a woman, moving cautiously but urgently. She was alone. Her clothes were dusty and torn, her long hair tangled and sticking to her sweat-streaked face. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the signs of exhaustion. She leaned heavily on a walking stick, and her pace faltered with each step. The desert was unforgiving, and it was clear she had been traveling for a long time without rest or water. He debated for a moment. Most travelers in his situation might have kept moving. Stopping could be dangerous. But something in the woman's posture, in the way she moved despite her exhaustion, pulled at a part of him he could not ignore. He had seen desperation before, had seen fear and determination mixed in a single human being. There was something different here. She was not just fleeing the harsh land, she was fleeing something he could not yet see. Carefully, he guided his horse closer, keeping low and slow so as not to startle her. The woman noticed him, and her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and caution. Samuel stopped a few yards away, raising a hand slightly to show he meant no harm. Her breathing was heavy, and the sweat on her forehead gleamed in the dying sunlight. She did not speak immediately, only stared, as if trying to measure whether he was a threat or a chance for survival. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but urgent. "Please help me," she said. Her words were careful, measured, as if she knew every word could determine her fate. "Take me on your horse. I cannot go any further alone." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He was not unfamiliar with pleas for help, but something in her tone was different. There was no false charm, no hidden demand. She was tired, desperate, and entirely vulnerable. He noticed her hands trembling slightly, and the way she shifted her weight indicated that she could collapse at any moment. His instincts told him that helping her could be dangerous, yet leaving her here could be worse. The rider took a slow breath. "It's dangerous," he said. "There are people in these lands who would not look kindly on me helping a stranger." She nodded, understanding. "I know," she whispered, "but I have nowhere else to go. Please, I beg you, I will not slow you down. I can hold on." Samuel studied her carefully. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. A strong-looking person could be weak inside, and a seemingly fragile individual could possess the courage of a warrior. He saw determination in her eyes, a quiet courage that refused to break even under extreme strain. The desert had already taken so much from her, yet she continued. That alone told him she was not to be underestimated. He gestured for her to come closer. "Careful," he said. "Mount carefully, hold tight, and don't fall." With effort, she climbed onto the horse behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. Samuel adjusted the reins, feeling the extra weight and the rhythm of her breathing against his back. Every movement had to be slow and deliberate. One wrong motion, one stumble could send both of them tumbling to the ground. Yet she held firm, gritting her teeth as they continued along the trail. The desert stretched before them, endless and merciless. Rocks jutted from the ground like the spines of sleeping beasts, and dry riverbeds carved deep into the earth, warning of past floods and hidden dangers. Samuel's horse moved carefully, stepping over sharp stones and avoiding loose sand that could cause a fall. The woman behind him remained silent for a long time, only occasionally whispering directions or warnings about paths that seemed safer than others. As they rode, Samuel began to sense the story behind her desperation. She was not merely lost. There was fear in her eyes, a quiet terror that suggested she had been running from people or events more dangerous than the desert itself. He did not press her with questions, understanding that survival sometimes required silence and trust more than words. The wind carried dust into their eyes, the sun scorched their skin, and the horse's steady rhythm became their only comfort. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into a brilliant canvas of oranges, purples, and reds. Night would come soon, bringing its own challenges. Cold would replace heat, and shadows could hide dangers that were impossible to predict. Samuel knew he had to find a safe place to stop before darkness fully settled over the land. The woman behind him shifted slightly, and he felt the subtle tension of her alertness. Even in exhaustion, she remained aware, watching the horizon, listening to every sound. Finally, they reached a narrow ravine, partially sheltered from the wind. Samuel guided his horse carefully down the slope and stopped near a cluster of boulders that offered some protection. He dismounted first, motioning for her to do the same. She slid off the horse carefully, her legs shaking, and they both sat on a flat rock, catching their breath. "You're strong," Samuel said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You've come a long way." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the fading light. "I have to," she said simply. "There's nothing left for me out there, only survival and the hope that someone might help me." Samuel nodded, understanding more than she could know. This was a woman shaped by hardship, molded by struggle, and driven by a will that refused to break. She had lost much, yet she carried on, trusting a stranger in the middle of the desert. That trust was not given lightly. It was earned in moments of sheer courage and necessity. Night settled over the desert, bringing with it an eerie silence. The wind shifted, carrying faint noises that made Samuel's hand instinctively move to the small knife at his belt. The woman noticed, but she did not panic. Instead, she offered him a faint smile, almost like a reassurance. They sat together, strangers yet bound by circumstance, sharing the quiet of the desert night. Samuel knew that this night would change both of them. How it would unfold, he could not yet see, but he felt a sense of responsibility and an unspoken bond forming in the shadows of the land. The fireflies began to appear, tiny sparks of light against the deep darkness. The stars twinkled above, endless and eternal, reminding Samuel of the vastness of the world and the fragility of life within it. He glanced at the woman once more. She was strong, brave, and intelligent, yet entirely human. For the first time in a long while, he felt that perhaps trust, even in the harshest places, could lead to survival, not just for one person but for both. As the night deepened, Samuel and the woman prepared to rest, keeping the fire minimal and quiet, aware that the desert was never truly silent. He had no idea what the next day would bring, but he knew one thing with certainty. He had chosen to help her, and that choice would shape the path ahead in ways neither of them could imagine. The desert had tested them, and they had passed the first trial, not as master and follower, but as two human beings bound by circumstance, courage, and the fragile hope that trust could survive even in the most unforgiving places. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long golden rays that reflected off the rocks and sand. The air was already warm, but the chill of the night still lingered in the shadows. Samuel had been awake for a while, his horse tethered nearby, ears flicking at every small sound. The woman was still sleeping, curled slightly to conserve warmth. He watched her for a moment, noting how even in rest, she carried herself with a quiet strength. Survival had made her cautious, careful, and fully aware of the dangers surrounding her. He prepared a small breakfast from the supplies he carried, dried meat and hard biscuits, and offered some to her when she woke. She accepted silently, nodding in thanks, her eyes alert despite her exhaustion. The desert demanded constant vigilance. Hunger was one danger, but there were many others: wild animals, unstable terrain, and the possibility of encountering hostile strangers. Once they had eaten and watered the horse from a small stream nearby, Samuel mounted first, motioning for her to follow. She climbed carefully behind him, holding on tightly as he guided the horse back onto the narrow trail. Every movement was cautious. The desert had taught Samuel that one misstep could be fatal, and he could not afford mistakes with another life depending on him. As they rode, the woman finally spoke, breaking the silence that had settled between them since the previous night. "I am glad you helped me," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Few would stop in these lands. Most see a stranger and keep walking. You chose to act." Samuel nodded slowly. "I have seen what happens when people refuse to help each other," he said. "I've seen it too many times. Sometimes we survive not because we are strong, but because someone else chose to care." The woman looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and caution. "I have been running for days," she said. "My people, my family, we have been caught in conflict. Some of them were killed. I had no choice but to leave." She paused, swallowing hard as if the memory pained her. "I know your people might not understand, but I am not here to fight. I only want to survive." Samuel listened without interruption, realizing that trust was being offered in small pieces, carefully measured. She was not asking for more than she needed, and she was aware that too much could endanger them both. Survival, he knew, required balance, not only of body, but of caution, respect, and understanding. The trail stretched on, twisting through canyons and over hills, revealing the harsh beauty of the land. The woman pointed out subtle signs that Samuel would have missed: a hidden water source, the direction of the wind, tracks in the sand that warned of animals nearby. He realized she was teaching him as much as she was learning from him. Her people had lived in these lands for generations, and every lesson carried the weight of experience passed down through countless years. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, making the desert almost unbearable. The horse grew tired, and the rider's legs ached from keeping balance and control. Yet the woman remained composed, guiding him silently through paths that were safer than the obvious routes. Her knowledge was invaluable. Without it, they might have wandered in circles, exhausted and lost, while dangers grew closer. Around midday, they stopped in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. Samuel allowed the horse to rest and drink, while he and the woman took a short break. They sat on stones, catching their breath and observing the landscape. She spoke again, this time with a note of urgency. "There are others tracking me," she said. "They want to harm me, to take something I cannot give." Samuel's hand instinctively rested on his knife. "How many?" he asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "They travel fast and they know the land well, but if we move carefully, we can stay ahead." Samuel considered this. The desert itself could be as dangerous as any human enemy. But the woman had knowledge that could guide them, paths hidden from casual travelers, streams that appeared only after rain, and natural shelters that offered cover from both sun and prying eyes. He realized that her promise the night before, the thing she said she could give that no one else could, was not about strength or charm. It was knowledge, wisdom, and guidance. The survival skills she offered were priceless, and Samuel understood that. They continued their journey, moving as quietly as possible. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rush of wind through the rocks, alerted them to potential danger. They avoided the main trails, choosing instead narrow passes that provided cover. The woman's directions were precise, her eyes scanning the horizon constantly, reading the land like a map written in symbols only she could understand. Samuel began to notice things he had never seen before: the subtle change in sand color indicating a nearby spring, the position of shadows revealing hidden crevices, and the faint tracks of animals leading to water. By mid-afternoon, they faced a particularly difficult stretch. A dry riverbed carved deep into the desert with steep walls and loose stones. The horse was hesitant, and Samuel carefully led it down the slope, testing each step. The woman guided him, pointing to secure footholds and warning of areas that could collapse. Every movement was deliberate, every choice measured. One mistake here could have been fatal. Once they reached the bottom, they paused to rest and drink. The woman remained alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "We cannot stay long," she said. "They may be watching from the cliffs. We have to keep moving." Samuel nodded, realizing that the journey was no longer just about survival in the desert, but also about evasion and strategy. Trust between them had grown, silent but strong. They were no longer simply traveler and stranger. They were allies, relying on each other's strengths to endure the harsh conditions and unknown dangers that lay ahead. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the temperature dropped slightly, and shadows lengthened across the desert floor. They found a small alcove in the rocks, a natural shelter that offered protection from the wind. Samuel set up a minimal camp, careful not to leave signs that could reveal their location to pursuers. They ate what little they had, sharing rations sparingly, and allowed the horse to rest. The woman finally spoke at length, telling Samuel more about her past. Her tribe had been caught in conflicts over land and resources, some with outsiders, some with their own people. She had witnessed death, betrayal, and loss, yet she had survived. Her knowledge of the land was born from necessity, taught by elders and honed by hardship. Samuel listened, realizing that her offer, the guidance she promised, was a gift far greater than any material possession. It was survival itself, a way through the desert that few could navigate successfully. Night fell fully and the stars appeared above them, sparkling in the clear desert sky. Samuel and the woman sat quietly, listening to the desert around them. There was a calmness in the air, but the tension remained. Every sound, every movement in the distance could indicate danger. Yet amidst the fear and exhaustion there was also trust, a fragile growing bond that allowed them to rest, if only briefly. The woman's eyes met his. "You have helped me more than you realize," she said softly. "Without you I would have been lost or worse, and I will help you in turn. I know the land in ways few do. I can guide you through it safely if you trust me." Samuel nodded, understanding fully. Trust, respect, and knowledge were the keys to survival in this harsh land. The desert tested not just the body but the mind and the spirit. And in this moment he realized that they could endure anything together if they stayed alert, careful, and wise. They settled down for the night, the horse nearby, and kept watch in turns. Samuel reflected on the day's journey, the lessons learned, and the woman's remarkable courage. She had survived impossible odds, and in helping her, he had also gained a teacher, a guide, and an ally. The desert had been unforgiving, but it had also revealed something essential. That survival often depended on trust, on human connection, and on knowledge passed from one person to another. The night passed slowly, filled with the quiet sounds of the desert, the wind, the distant call of nocturnal animals, and the occasional rustle of sand. Samuel and the woman remained alert, but they also allowed themselves moments of rest, understanding that exhaustion could be as deadly as any pursuer. They were not just surviving, they were learning from each other, navigating a world that demanded courage, intelligence, and cooperation. As dawn approached, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and pink, Samuel prepared to continue the journey. The woman stood beside him, alert and ready, guiding him along paths that would lead them safely onward. Their journey was far from over, but the bond they had formed, forged in hardship and trust, would carry them through the challenges ahead. The desert was vast and merciless, yet together they could navigate it and survive. The morning sun rose slowly, spilling golden light across the desert. The air was still warm from the previous day, but a chill lingered in the shadows of the rocks and canyons. Samuel led the horse along the narrow trail, the woman sitting carefully behind him. Her eyes scanned the land constantly, alert for any sign of danger. Samuel had come to rely on her instincts, noticing the subtle movements of her head, the direction of her gaze, and the way she interpreted the wind. She had a knowledge of the land that was both natural and precise, a skill honed by years of living with the desert rather than against it. They moved cautiously, knowing that the people who had been pursuing her could appear at any moment. The tracks in the sand told a story, faint marks that suggested others were near, careful and silent in their approach. Samuel had learned to read the signs, but the woman's guidance was invaluable. She could identify the difference between human tracks and animal tracks, the faintest disturbance in the sand that would have been invisible to anyone else. As they traveled, she began to share more of her knowledge, pointing out subtle changes in the terrain. "See that ridge ahead," she said. "It may look solid, but the rocks there are loose. A slip could trap us or break the horse's leg. We must take the long path around, even if it takes more time." Samuel nodded, trusting her judgment. Every choice mattered. One wrong step could end the journey in disaster. The desert was unforgiving, and both of them understood that. They continued on, moving slowly but steadily, the horse picking its way carefully over uneven ground. Hours passed. The heat of the day grew intense, and the sun seemed relentless. Samuel noticed the woman's resilience. Despite exhaustion, she did not complain. Her body was tired, yes, but her mind remained sharp, her eyes constantly scanning for danger. She adjusted her position to balance herself on the horse, whispered directions when needed, and seemed to anticipate challenges before they appeared. Her strength was remarkable, a combination of courage, experience, and intelligence. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising sharply on both sides. The shadows provided some relief from the sun, but the confined space also made them vulnerable. Samuel slowed the horse, moving carefully. The woman pointed out signs of movement ahead, small disturbances in the dust, footprints that did not belong to animals. Someone had passed through recently. "They are close," she whispered. "We need to be ready." Samuel tightened his grip on the reins. The horse sensed his tension, moving cautiously as well. They continued, silent except for the soft sound of hooves on sand and the occasional rustle of the wind. Every sense was heightened. The desert, which had seemed vast and empty the day before, now felt alive with hidden threats. Hours later, they reached a small stream that wound through the canyon floor. The woman guided the horse carefully to the water, allowing it to drink while they rested. She drank sparingly, mindful of conserving energy. Samuel studied her, realizing that her survival skills were more than physical. They were mental, strategic, and deeply intuitive. She knew how to preserve resources, avoid danger, and use the land to their advantage. As they rested, Samuel asked, "How did you learn all this? Your knowledge, it's remarkable." She looked at him with a faint smile. "It is not just me. My people have lived here for generations. We watch, we learn, and we survive. The desert teaches, but it is unforgiving. You must pay attention always. One mistake and you are gone." Samuel nodded. He had spent years traveling these lands, but he had never known it in this way, not from the perspective of someone born into its rhythms, someone who read every sign as if it were a message. He realized that she had given him more than guidance. She had given him a new understanding of the desert, a way to see it not as a challenge to conquer but as a partner in survival. They mounted again, continuing their journey with renewed caution. The canyon walls rose higher, and the trail became more treacherous. Loose rocks and hidden dips in the sand made progress slow, but the woman's guidance was precise. She pointed out where the horse should step, where they could find stable ground, and where shadows indicated potential dangers. Late in the afternoon, they encountered a fork in the trail. One path led to a higher ridge, exposed and dangerous, while the other wound deeper into the canyon, narrower but providing cover. She urged Samuel to take the narrow path. "It is slower but safer," she explained. "Those who follow us will not expect it." Samuel agreed. Trust had become essential between them. They moved carefully, the horse picking its way through the tight canyon, guided by the woman's directions. Every movement was deliberate, every sound analyzed. The desert seemed to hold its breath as they progressed, the quiet tension almost unbearable. Suddenly, a faint sound reached their ears, a crack of a branch, soft but deliberate. The woman stiffened, her eyes narrowing. Samuel froze, listening. The sound repeated, closer now, unmistakably human. Someone was following them. "They are tracking us," she whispered. "We must move quickly." Samuel urged the horse forward, taking the path deeper into the canyon. The walls were narrow, the shadows long, and every step required care. They moved silently, relying on the woman's knowledge to avoid hazards and detection. The pursuers were skilled, but so were they. The woman's guidance gave them an edge, a way to stay one step ahead. Hours passed with tense caution. The sun began to set and the canyon darkened. They found a small cave, partially hidden by rocks, where they could rest and observe the trail. Samuel prepared a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. The woman checked the surroundings, alert to any signs of danger. They sat together, silent except for the occasional whisper, their trust in each other deepening. "I have to tell you something," the woman said finally. "What I promised you, the knowledge I offered, is more than survival. It is a way to stay alive even when the odds are against you. I can guide you through lands few outsiders can navigate, but you must trust me completely." Samuel nodded. He had already begun to understand this. Trust was their most valuable tool. Without it, they would have been lost or caught by those who pursued her. He realized that her offer was not a gift in the usual sense. It was a lifeline, a combination of wisdom, skill, and courage that could save them both. Night fell fully, and the desert became quiet except for the occasional call of a nocturnal animal. Samuel and the woman kept watch in turns, maintaining vigilance despite exhaustion. Every sound, every movement could indicate danger. Yet amidst the fear, there was a growing bond. They were no longer simply traveler and stranger. They were partners in survival, relying on each other's strengths and knowledge to navigate the harsh and unpredictable landscape. By the early hours of the morning, Samuel felt a sense of calm. They had avoided immediate danger, learned from each other, and survived another day in the desert. The woman's guidance had been essential, but so had their shared determination and trust. They had become a team, united by circumstance, intelligence, and courage. As dawn approached, painting the sky with pale light, Samuel realized something important. Survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about understanding, learning, and trusting those who knew the land better than you. The woman had given him more than safety. She had given him insight, strategy, and a way to see the desert as a living, responsive world rather than just a harsh obstacle. They prepared to continue, aware that the journey ahead would not be easy. Yet for the first time, Samuel felt a sense of hope. They had survived challenges, evaded danger, and learned from each other. The desert remained unforgiving, but together they were stronger, more capable, and more prepared. Trust and knowledge had become their greatest weapons, and they would need every ounce of both to face what lay ahead. The days that followed were marked by a careful pace. The desert was relentless, but the woman's guidance had given them the tools to survive, even when the odds seemed impossible. Samuel had begun to trust her completely, relying on her expertise and her quiet strength. In return, he shared his knowledge of the outside world, of places beyond the desert that she had never seen, of settlers and towns and life beyond the horizon. But as the days passed, the pressure mounted. Their pursuers, skilled in tracking and hunting, were getting closer. Every step they took, every choice they made, had to be calculated. The woman continued to lead them through narrow canyons, hidden paths, and dry riverbeds, but with each passing hour, the sense of danger grew. Samuel knew they couldn't keep evading their trackers forever. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the desert, the woman spoke with urgency. "We have to move faster," she said, her voice low but firm. "They are close now. If we don't act quickly, they will catch us." Samuel nodded. He had sensed it too, the faint signs of pursuit, the quickening of his own heart when he thought about how little time they had left. The desert had been their ally so far, offering shelter, hiding places, and the knowledge they needed. But now the land itself felt like it was closing in on them. They rode through the night, moving with the moon to guide them. Samuel's horse was tired, but the woman urged him on, knowing that they needed to reach the higher ground before dawn. She spoke little, but her every movement was decisive. She pointed to the faintest marks in the sand, guiding them away from the open paths and into hidden ravines where the horses' hooves barely left a trace. As the night wore on, Samuel began to feel the weight of exhaustion in his bones. His eyes grew heavy, and his body ached from the constant motion. But the woman remained as alert as ever, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. Her strength was unmatched, and in her, Samuel saw a reflection of the desert itself, tough, resilient, and unyielding. They reached a ridge by the early morning hours. The view from the top was vast, the desert stretching out in every direction. Below in the distance, Samuel saw the dust rising, the unmistakable sign of riders closing in. His heart raced. They had made it to the ridge, but they weren't safe yet. "We need to get to the other side of the ridge," the woman said, pointing toward a narrow pass that led through a set of jagged rocks. "There is a cave there. We can hide and wait for them to pass." Samuel's pulse quickened. The cave sounded like a good idea, but it was no guarantee of safety. The woman's eyes, however, were filled with certainty. She knew this land better than anyone, and if she said the cave was their best option, he would follow. They pushed forward, the horse climbing steadily up the rocky incline. The path was treacherous, but they made their way carefully, keeping their movements slow and deliberate. Every now and then they stopped, listening for the sounds of pursuit. The wind carried faint sounds, voices, distant shouts, but they kept moving, undeterred. The cave was just as the woman had described. It was small, barely big enough for them and the horse, but it offered shelter from the wind and a vantage point to observe the terrain below. Samuel dismounted, his legs stiff from the long ride. The woman moved swiftly, securing the horse in a hidden corner of the cave and making sure they would be difficult to spot from below. "Now we wait," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The hours passed slowly in the cave, and the silence between them was heavy. Samuel could feel the tension in the air, the sense of impending danger that hung like a storm cloud. He glanced at the woman, noticing the lines of exhaustion on her face. Despite everything they had been through, she remained calm, collected, focused. For the first time since they had met, Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude toward her. She had given him so much, her knowledge, her trust, her strength, and in return he had done his best to help her survive. Their bond, forged in the fires of the desert, had become something unspoken, something stronger than words. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Samuel and the woman both held their breath, straining to hear. The riders were getting closer. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. But then, the sounds grew fainter. The riders, unaware of the cave, passed by the ridge, heading in the opposite direction. Samuel and the woman remained still, their bodies tense, every sense alert. The wind howled outside, but inside the cave it was quiet. Minutes passed. Finally, when the sounds of the riders had faded into the distance, the woman let out a slow, relieved breath. "They're gone," she said, her voice soft but steady. Samuel exhaled deeply, his body relaxing for the first time in hours. "We did it," he whispered. The woman nodded, a small smile flickering across her face. "For now," she said, "but we cannot rest for long. We must keep moving." Samuel agreed. They couldn't afford to linger in one place for too long. The desert was a harsh and unpredictable land, and the riders could return at any moment. Yet in that small cave, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the desert, they found a brief moment of peace. They had survived the night, evaded capture, and made it through another challenge together. Over the next few days, they continued their journey, moving cautiously but with purpose. The woman led them through rocky passes and hidden valleys, always staying one step ahead of danger. They crossed paths with other travelers, but they kept to the shadows, careful not to attract attention. The riders who had been chasing them were no longer a direct threat, but the woman remained vigilant, knowing that the desert held many dangers beyond human pursuers. By the time they reached a small settlement on the outskirts of the desert, both Samuel and the woman were exhausted, their bodies worn from the constant motion. The town was a welcome sight, a place where they could rest, replenish their supplies, and regroup. But even as they approached, Samuel could feel the weight of their journey, the knowledge that they had survived something few could have endured. The woman looked at him, her dark eyes steady. "We made it," she said quietly. "Thank you," Samuel nodded. "We did," he said, a sense of quiet pride in his voice. "And we did it together." As they entered the town, Samuel realized that this journey had changed him. He had come into the desert as a solitary traveler, used to relying only on himself. But in surviving with the woman, he had learned something far more valuable. That survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about trust, partnership, and the willingness to help others when they needed it most. The woman had taught him how to see the desert not as a threat, but as a place full of hidden beauty and wisdom. She had shown him that survival was not just about escaping danger, but about understanding the land, learning from it, and using its secrets to live another day. As they walked through the settlement, Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had survived together, but the journey had given him something even more important, an understanding of what it meant to trust, to be vulnerable, and to work together toward a common goal. The desert was vast and its dangers were many, but it had also offered them a chance to prove that even in the harshest of places, survival was possible, not just through strength, but through the strength of human connection. And as they left the desert behind, Samuel knew that the lessons learned in the wilderness would stay with him forever. The journey had shaped him, and it had shaped the woman who had been his guide. Together, they had survived. Together, they had faced the desert and walked away stronger for it.